38,987 criminals released, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but 1 minute ago. Within seconds, alarms blared across the country. Streets froze, social feeds detonated, and in what officials are already calling a national rupture, tens of thousands are now marching towards city centres in what looks less like a protest and more like the first sparks of open revolt. The moment the announcement dropped, the nation convulsed. A sudden release of 38,987 offenders, burglars, violent repeat offenders, and men flagged as high risk, triggered a wave of panic that swept across Britain in under 5 minutes. This wasn't framed as leniency. This wasn't framed as reform. Officials described it as a necessary emergency measure. But the public didn't buy a word of it. Within minutes, crowds erupted in Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds and London. At 6:41 p.m, police scanners reported the first clashes. By 6:45, officers admitted they were already overwhelmed. And by 6:52, the term open revolt began trending nationwide. Citizens demanded answers. Ministers stuttered through a hastily arranged press briefing, insisting the situation was under control. But it wasn't. The streets were shifting, the crowds were multiplying, and the state's grip was visibly slipping. Fireworks were detonated outside Parliament, barricades formed along Westminster Bridge, the police deployed 2 suppression units, both immediately surrounded by furious mobs, shouting that government had abandoned its duty. The anger wasn't random, it was calculated. People pointed to the same ticking disaster the country has been warned about for years. Prisons bursting at 99% capacity, courts drowning in backlogs, and crime rising faster than ministers could deny it. Tonight, all of it collided. Reports confirmed that dozens of inmates walked out of the prison gates laughing, filming themselves, mocking the system that had just released them. One clip showed a man stepping out to a waiting BMW convoy, champagne bottles already open as if victory had been prearranged. Comment sections exploded with rage. Victims watched in disbelief. Families of past victims demanded resignations from every level of leadership. Even senior police insiders admitted the truth quietly. We don't have the manpower to track them. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not next week. The justice system, already buckling, was now collapsing in real time. And as darkness settled across Britain, one question echoed through every street, every station, every live stream. Has the government finally lost control? The silence from the top was not reassuring, it was damning. In the last hour, reports confirmed over a dozen small-scale riots, multiple burning vehicles and officers suffering injuries in attempts to contain the fury. And this was only the first hour. The real storm was still on the horizon. By the second hour, the chaos was no longer spreading. It was accelerating. At 7:14 p.m, Scotland Yard issued an unprecedented bulletin warning all London units to brace for citywide turbulence. Moments later, a convoy of prison transport vans attempting to move high-risk detainees was intercepted by a mob of nearly 600 enraged residents. Bottles, bricks and metal rods rained down as officers scrambled for cover. The vans reversed blindly, crashing into barriers as the crowd surged forward. Across the nation, the same pattern echoed like synchronised explosions. In Birmingham, a police cordon was breached in under 90 seconds. In Liverpool, rioters overturned a marked unit and set it ablaze, chanting that the government had betrayed every citizen who played by the rules, while criminals walked free without consequence. Rumours of an internal systems failure inside the Ministry of Justice only fuelled the fury. Insider leaks claimed entire categories of offenders had been released without proper reviews, without monitoring equipment, and in some cases without even verified home addresses. We cannot track them, one anonymous official admitted. There is no plan beyond the release order. That confession ignited the public far more than any protest chant ever could. By 7:33 p.m, crowds in Manchester surged through the central district, smashing through shop fronts, lighting flares and confronting officers who had been ordered not to escalate unless absolutely necessary. Videos began circulating of mass groups patrolling neighbourhoods with makeshift shields, warning released offenders to stay out or face consequences. The country wasn't simply angry anymore, it was splintering. Vigilante groups formed out of thin air, patrolling streets the police no longer had the numbers to control. The government's attempt to reassure the public backfired spectacularly. A spokesperson claimed that the majority of released individuals pose minimal risk. Within minutes, that phrase was torn apart across every platform. Commentators labelled it propaganda. Protesters shouted it back at officers with pure contempt. Victims' families held up photos of loved ones, demanding to know how minimal risk justified releasing men who had already proven what they were capable of. At 7:48 p.m, a massive surge hit Westminster. Thousands compressed into the district, pushing past barriers, flooding the roads surrounding government buildings as chants thundered through the air, "Resign now." Police attempted a final containment manoeuvre, forming a solid line 5 ranks deep. It lasted less than 2 minutes. The front collapsed under a wave of bodies, projectiles and raw fury. Officers retreated in disarray. Protesters took control of Parliament Square, waving signs, lighting smoke grenades and claiming it as the People's Zone. Footage from overhead drones showed an image that sent shockwaves across the country. 3 separate fires burning simultaneously within view of the Palace of Westminster, the symbol of government authority now cast in the glow of its own people's rage. And as the clock hit 8 p.m, one chilling truth became undeniable. Britain was no longer witnessing unrest. It was witnessing the first stage of a nationwide breakdown. By 8:21 p.m, the crisis crossed a line that even veteran officers said they had never seen in their entire careers. Emergency call centres were flooded beyond capacity, with operators forced to prioritise only life or death situations. Everything else was pushed aside. Domestic break-ins, assaults, vandalism, all placed on indefinite hold because there simply weren't enough patrol units left to respond. In Yorkshire, a police outpost was stormed by a crowd demanding the identities of newly released offenders living in their neighbourhoods. Officers barricaded the doors from the inside as the mob pounded against the shutters with pieces of metal torn from street signs. In London, the chaos spread to residential zones that had previously remained calm. Families were seen evacuating apartment blocks as rumours circulated that released gangs were regrouping. Whether true or not didn't matter. Fear travelled faster than fact. And fear had now become the country's second language. At 8:37 p.m, insiders leaked a document showing that nearly 4,000 high-risk offenders had been released with non-functioning GPS tags. Some had malfunctioning batteries, others had no signal coverage. A few didn't have tags at all. The revelation detonated across social media like a bomb. The public erupted. Comment threads turned into digital battlegrounds, with citizens demanding to know how the government could allow violent criminals to disappear into the night with zero oversight. Meanwhile, the police were drowning in a rising tide of hostility. Officers reported that every attempt to regain control was met with coordinated pushback from crowds who were no longer simply angry, they were ungovernable. Riot teams were redeployed across 5 major cities, spreading their forces so thin that frontline units admitted they were effectively defending streets with nothing more than presence and hope. The justice system, already shaken, began showing cracks that couldn't be hidden. Court officials disclosed that dozens of cases scheduled for the week ahead were being cancelled because there was no space left to hold new defendants. Magistrates were furious, lawyers were speechless, victims were devastated, trials delayed meant attackers walked free. Again, it was a cycle feeding the unrest like oxygen feeds a fire. At 8:51 p.m, a shocking video began circulating. An inmate released only hours earlier was seen celebrating with his crew, boasting that the system is finished and promising that tonight is just the beginning. The clip hit 1 million views in 40 minutes. Police chiefs privately admitted this single video had done more damage to public trust than anything seen in years. It wasn't just the criminals mocking the system, it was the system proving them right. Fear began pushing people into corners the government never anticipated. Neighbourhood watch groups transformed into armed citizen patrols. Baseball bats, makeshift shields, flashlights taped to fence posts. They weren't waiting for help anymore, they were preparing for war. By 9:06 p.m, the atmosphere had shifted again. This wasn't outrage. This wasn't protest. This was survival instinct. News outlets tried to reassure viewers that the government had matters under active review, but nobody was listening. The streets were filled with smoke, sirens and chants demanding resignations. The country was no longer asking for answers. It was demanding accountability. And as the night deepened, one reality cut through the noise. Britain was standing on the brink, and the next hour could determine whether order was restored or permanently lost. By 9:32 p.m, the government finally broke its silence, but the damage was already beyond containment. A visibly shaken spokesperson appeared on national broadcast claiming that emergency powers were being considered to stabilise the situation. The statement was vague, hesitant, and delivered with the tone of an administration that knew it had lost the country's confidence. And within seconds of airing, the message sparked more fury, not less. People didn't want considerations. They wanted control. They wanted accountability. They wanted someone to take responsibility for unleashing nearly 40,000 offenders back into society in a single catastrophic wave. Protesters stormed the steps of local councils across at least 6 cities, holding signs accusing the government of criminal negligence. In London, crowds pushed past police lines and surrounded a government transport vehicle, forcing officers to retreat again. At 9:48 p.m, the first reports emerged that several probation offices had been evacuated after threats were sent to staff who were accused of approving the releases. Officials insisted they had no choice, that the order came from above. But to the public, that excuse felt like an admission of guilt. As the crisis deepened, senior police officers held emergency calls behind closed doors. Leaked audio revealed their brutal assessment. Resources were gone, manpower was exhausted, and if a major riot erupted in any additional city, there would be no capacity left to respond. One chief admitted that the force was operating on fumes. Another warned that tonight could mark the point where we lose operational control. Meanwhile, the offenders themselves were disappearing. By 10:03 p.m, internal trackers revealed that over 11,000 newly released individuals had already failed to check in with probation. Another 5,000 were listed as location unknown. The release plan, sold as a calculated safety valve, had disintegrated into chaos. Inside hospitals, the consequences of the night were becoming visible. Injured officers, wounded protesters, terrified civilians caught in the crossfire, all overwhelmed emergency rooms in city after city. A senior paramedic described the scene using just one word: apocalyptic. At 10:17 p.m, a final blow hit the government. Footage emerged from inside a high-security prison showing staff packing up belongings, reportedly ordered to clear space for incoming detainees who had either been rearrested or captured by citizen groups. The footage spread like wildfire, confirming what many feared. The system was cannibalising itself. The prisons emptied at dusk and were already filling again by nightfall. Each bed flipping from inmate to inmate as if the country had turned into a revolving door of lawlessness. Anger turned into something colder, more dangerous: resolve. Communities began declaring themselves no-go zones for offenders. Men lined up outside residential blocks with bats, metal pipes and torches, creating their own checkpoints. Not because they wanted power, but because they believed the state no longer had any. By 10:41 p.m, analysts on late-night TV debated whether this was simply a crisis or the early stages of a national fracture. Critics blamed years of ignored warnings, disastrous prison policies, collapsing border control, and an administration that gambled with public safety and lost. Government insiders whispered about resignations, opposition leaders demanded emergency elections, and on the streets, thousands chanted the same message that echoed across the nation like a drumbeat: if the government cannot protect the people will protect themselves. Midnight had approached, and with it came a realisation that chilled every household watching the events unfold. This wasn't just a failure of policy. It was the moment Britain discovered what happens when the guardians of order step back and the public is forced to step forward.